Hello, everyone, and welcome to Back in America Live. Back in America is a podcast questioning Americans' identity, culture, and values. And this interview is part of a series of interviews on election 2020. I'm delighted to welcome Richard Heinberg. Hi, Richard.
Hello, Stan. Good to be with you.
How are you today?
I'm well, thanks. And you?
Good. So, just for the audience, would you mind introducing yourself?
I'm senior fellow with Post Carbon Institute, which is a small nonprofit think tank located on the west coast of the U.S., and we deal with climate and energy issues primarily.
Okay, thank you. So, talking about climate, I think that climate justice is definitely a focus of this new administration. How does that make you feel?
Well, certainly more hopeful than has been the case during the last 4 years. How much will actually be accomplished, is, of course, is still to be seen, and largely depends on the results of the two senatorial races that are still yet to be decided, with runoffs in December in Georgia. If the Democrats can take both of those seats and gain control of the Senate, then there's the possibility for some, really significant legislation, something like Green New Deal. On the other hand, if the Republicans remain in charge in the Senate, then very little legislation that's meaningful is likely, either on the climate front or on a whole range of other issue sets. And what's likely in that case is that President Biden will have to do whatever he can through regulation and presidential executive orders. And some things can happen that way. I mean, clearly the parts of the executive branch that were responsible for dealing with either measuring climate change or issuing regulations, all of those have just been gutted during the Trump administration. The EPA, National Ocean Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. I mean, all of these agencies have just been kneecapped. So getting rid of the Trump political appointees and putting back in, sensible, trained scientists to head these agencies will help enormously. But that only gets us back to, where we were in 2016. And of course, the climate crisis is moving onward, whether we move or not. So we're going to have to do a lot better than that.
Right. Talking of which, what policies do you think that they should, the Biden-Harris team should enact in their 101st days?
Well, from a climate perspective, getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies to the extent that that's possible without the cooperation of the Senate, and putting back in, of course, rejoining the Paris Climate Accords. That's a given, and Biden has said he's going to do that. Putting back in place the fuel economy standards that Obama had set forth and that Trump removed. Also, regulations for coal plants, nitrogen oxide emissions, and methane emissions. The methane emissions are really important because the Obama administration had begun putting some meaningful regulation on methane emissions. And of course, methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas, and the fossil fuel industry, particularly natural gas industry, is responsible for a very important, noticeable amount of methane emissions. So doing something about that would make a difference, certainly.
Right. Well, I was speaking with uh, a person that was telling me, Mark Charles, an independent candidate uh, during the past election, and he was telling me that Biden and Harris are really just going to preserve the status quo. So, it's hard to imagine how they can actually transition to a post-carbon civilization. I know this is your forte and really what you are fighting for. Do you truly believe that this country is going to move away from fossil fuel?
Well, it it will one way or another. Just because fossil fuels are finite, depleting resources, and we're already seeing the fracking industry is just in a financial mess. Companies are going bankrupt because they need a much higher price for oil than currently exists if they're going to make a profit. And what they've been doing over the past decade, as they've been rapidly increasing production, is they've been depleting the best, highest quality resources first. So what's left for the frackers is really just the crumbs on the table. And we've at our organization, we've done some original research and analysis on this. You can find on our website, postcarbon.org. And the research is really clear. The whole tight oil boom that increased U.S. oil production so dramatically over the last decade was really a one-off, short-term kind of thing, and we're reaching the end of that boom one way or another. Regardless what oil prices do or whatever. But with low oil prices, I mean, it's absolutely clear that the industry can't continue. So we're going to transition away from fossil fuels one way or another. The question is, are we going to do it in some way that gives us a different path forward? Are we going to have a managed transition, or just a kind of energy-led collapse of the financial system and the support system that enables a modern industrial economy to operate?
Right. So going back to this election, do you have any hope that those two, Biden and Harris, are the right person at the right time to help us transition?
Well, the right people at the right time. It depends on what factors you're focusing on. I mean, in an ideal world, we would have sort of radical left populists like Bernie Sanders, who would be able to push through really imaginative, bold climate policies. But you have to take into account the moment we're in politically. The country is fractured and fragmented. A lot of people voted for Donald Trump and really believe that his policies were just fine, and that's a huge problem. So Biden and Harris believe, and I think there's a good argument to be made that what we have to do first is just heal the country politically and get back to some kind of status quo where progress is even possible. And if we have a divided Congress, it's what can be accomplished with just proposals that can't get through. Some kind of realistic, pragmatic approach might be actually the best we can hope for at this moment. Now, is the best we can hope for enough? Mm-hmm. That's another question, and that's what we'll find out. And it may not be. Mm-hmm. America may be facing a kind of reckoning where a global power reaches its limits for various reasons: ecological, financial, social, political. And gets beaten back. Of course, this tends to happen throughout history. No global power emerges and just remains on top forever.
Right.
So America may have to just come to terms with limits to its own power.
Hmm. So Trump is obviously still in power until January. What what damages can he still do to the environment?
Well, he can do. The amount of time left for damage to the environment is fairly limited. I mean, most of the damage to the environment is done through longer term processes and policies. And he's done most of what he can do, I think, during this time. I mean, he's already gutted as we talked about earlier, gutted the regulatory administrations and so on. So there's not that much more he can do in that regard. But on his way out the door, he can do a great deal actually to continue to undermine the trust and cooperation that are necessary for a political system, a democracy, to function. He's already doing that by contesting the legitimacy of the election. And doing that, of course, works to his practical advantage. He fires up his base, and he's going to need that base to continue to exist so they can, donate to his next campaign, which he's already started a political action committee. And he wants to be able to use those funds, to loot those funds for his own personal use in various ways, to pay off his debts, his enormous debts coming due. He's going to be, trying to stay out of prison and out of court as much as possible for the next couple of years. He has a lot of problems to deal with. And if he has, millions of Americans who believe that he's the rightful president of the United States, and by golly, he deserves, his place in the sun again. Well, that serves a practical advantage for him. But what it does to the country, of course, is just horrific. It calls into question the legitimacy of the government, and it's very difficult for a country to operate, for a government to operate if its legitimacy is contested by a very, very sizable portion of the population. And that's unfortunately where we're headed.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So what issues are you going to be monitoring now in terms of US politics when it comes to climate and fossil fuel?
Well, the Biden has said he doesn't want to ban fracking. Fine, okay. The fracking is starting to go away anyway, and that's a process that will continue. But who's going to clean up the environmental damage that's been caused by fracking? Because if all these companies go bankrupt, and we're talking about dozens and dozens of companies that have led the charge in terms of tight oil and fracking, both for oil and natural gas. If all those companies go bankrupt, well, who's going to pay to decommission those wells? Somehow the what's left of the oil industry has got to be repurposed to clean up that environmental damage. At the same time, obviously, we need to transition to not only to renewable energy, building enormous amounts of infrastructure, both for energy production, also, that's electricity. The 80% of the energy we use is not in the form of electricity. It's liquid gaseous fuels for transportation, home heating, manufacturing, materials extraction and transformation all through the economy. That other 80% of energy usage needs to be dealt with, and we need a lot of research and development in that regard. How do you make cement without carbon emissions? How do you do all these high heat industrial process? What do we do with aviation? Do we just let it go, or is it possible to maintain some of the aviation industry using synthetic fuels made with hydrogen and captured carbon and so on? all of these things have to be sorted out. I mean, this is the biggest industrial project looming ahead of us that humanity has ever faced, and it's not going to happen as quickly as it absolutely needs to, unless we get the best minds in the world and in the country working on it, and have some funds to enable the project to happen with. So the main thing is, are Biden and Harris going to take this sufficiently seriously? For politicians, at best, right now, climate change is one of several issues. We've got racial injustice, we've got climate change, we've got pandemic, all these things, all these balls to juggle. And, that's inevitable. You can't just ignore any one of them. But we have to understand climate change is an existential threat. Mm-hmm. If we don't get this right, if we don't get the energy transition right, then all of these other problems are like, well,
sure. Yeah, if you don't have a planet to live on.
Yeah, without a planet, economic justice is not an issue. It's just not even an issue.
So before we hang up, any positive note? Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel, or is it still as dark as it was?
Well, I mean, the fact that the election went to Biden and Harris, and the fact that they actually had a decisive victory. This hasn't really been explained, I think, adequately or properly to the American people. I mean, when all the votes were counted, Biden and Harris will have probably ended up getting something like 7 million more votes than Trump. And that's a very substantial, that's a mandate. And the same with the Electoral College. It wasn't just a little squeaky victory. It was a good sized conventional Electoral College win. So the American people need to get that, and the Biden-Harris team need to assume the mantle of that victory and begin to take this set of issues that we've been talking about very seriously. And what I'll be looking for is, are they doing that? And then is the media helping to make this clear to the people? Because unless the American people really understand what we're up against, then there isn't going to be the support for the kinds of policies that will actually be necessary for us to make it through the rest of this century.
Okay. Well, Richard Heinberg, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for this insight regarding the election.
Well, thank you, Stan. It's always a pleasure speaking with you.
Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.